Welcome to VCR, Vintage Cinema Rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
And I have crossed oceans of time to find you.
Come on, that line is like really good.
No, it's funny.
That's actually the line that sold the movie to Gary Oldman, believe it or not.
I do believe it. It's funny. I think I've said on this podcast before that like when I hear or see really, really sappy romantic shit, sometimes in my head I'm like, I'm stealing that and I'm going to use it. So I don't know. Maybe on my next date I'll wheel that one out.
Yeah, that's something else. Like, that's poetic.
Yeah, there's something very beautiful and poetic about that. The screenwriter probably patted himself on the back that day.
Yeah,
when he wrote it.
Sorry, I was gonna talk about more about that, but I guess I should say that this is review / deep dive of Bram Stoker's Dracula. We're doing spoiler free, talking in front of the camera, and you haven't seen this movie before, go check out the primer episode.
Go fucking see it. Yeah.
Also go watch it.
Yeah.
Because if nothing else, even if you didn't vibe with this movie, I think we're gonna have a lot to talk about on this episode.
Yeah, actually, speaking of that line, crossed oceans of time to find you. Why don't we just jump right into the love story?
That's exactly what I wanted to do. And
yeah.
I also, just framing that, I think that making this a tragedy, like a Dracula as like this tragic character,
tragic lover,
who's like, obviously Dracula's not a good dude, like he's Vlad the Impaler in this movie.
Well, there's a scene where he feeds a baby to his like harem of weird seductresses.
He has lost all humanity at that point in time as well, but there's also like something very tragic to this character and like this backstory that he has and this inner like conflict that he has throughout the movie as well that's very compelling.
Yeah.
So that's what we should say is like Bram Stoker's Dracula, Francis Ford Coppola's version of this. And as a side note, the reason why it's called Bram Stoker's Dracula is because they didn't want to get in a legal battle over another Dracula movie that had come out recently, and they had just used Dracula in it. So this was a legal thing.
I think
why they
I heard
added
that Coppola wanted to call it just D at one point, which was a dumb idea, and I'm glad they talked about it.
Yes,
are you going to see that new vampire movie? D? No, I'm going to go see that new action movie. L. But I digress. Okay, so here's the thing. I'm just going to put my cards on the table. So for those of you who watched last week's episode, Blake evidently liked this movie a little more than I did. Mm-hmm. I don't hate it. It just wasn't really for me.
Yep.
I had an okay time, but like I wasn't like slapping my knee as much. My problem with this love story is that I admire like the passion and all the, the Victorian,
repressed sexual desire.
Heat, let's say the heat behind it, but I never really bought this love story.
Okay.
I was a little like,
And I think that's actually comments towards maybe where the substance of this movie does kind of fail, in that this movie is so stylistic that there's really like big plot holes or stuff that like if you think about too hard, you just kind of get really confused and lost.
See, okay, so Dracula is dealing with Keanu Reeves, and Keanu Reeves is just holding on, just trying to get through every scene with this guy. And, he has a little picture of Mina. And, of course, Winona Ryder plays Elizabeth and Mina, the Dracula's lost love. And he sees a picture, and he's just like,
right.
Do you believe in destiny? And I forget what Keanu Reeves said to that, but it was probably extremely forgettable. So then Dracula basically goes to London and hunts this woman down, and the implication is that she's the reincarnation of his lost love, right?
Right.
So I will say there's that scene where they have like kind of a meet cute on the street where he's kind of talking to her, and she's being, she's acting like a woman who's being approached by a strange man, just being like, oh,
it's like the equivalent of like you walk up to someone and being like, oh my God, you look like just like this person. And it's like they're hitting on you, but like you're not into it. And then it gets weird.
You're just like, oh,
I don't know who that person is, dude.
Yeah, no, thanks. And, she's kind of, blows him off. But then, and he has that great line where he's like, he like lifts his hat and he's like, I have offended you. And then he just kind of walks away. And then she's like, no, wait, like, I've offended you, blah, 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 blah. And, like, you know what? Like, watching that scene again, I think I watched it again this morning. I was like, I kind of buy it.
Yeah.
Like, he's very persistent, and, like, they do kind of bond a little, and he's very, like, there's something very, he's got these intense royal features.
Yeah, and, like, it's Gary Oldman. Like, the guy, he's both charismatic, charming, and, like, relatively attractive.
Yeah, no, he's. By the way, side note, it's so surreal seeing a young Gary Oldman, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it's funny too. He was 32 when he did this movie, so that's like
Oh, wild.
So like the age I'm about to turn.
Yeah.
It's surreal seeing him next to Keanu Reeves because like he looks like he could be Keanu Reeves' dad, but there's only like 7 years between them.
You're right. Yeah,
So,
for sure.
just different faces, you know?
Yep.
So yeah, I don't know. And then like they kind of have this date where she takes him to like this museum and all this stuff is happening. And like, so scenes like that, I actually do kind of buy the connection between the two of them.
Right.
Right.
Well, and even like, later in the movie, the rat scene where he seduces her, and that scene I think is really compelling because it shows like when he's with her, his human side starts to crop up again. Like the side that he's lost hundreds of years ago. Like he has this moment of like feeling of, oh my God, what am I doing right now? I'm turning her into what I've become and I'm a monster.
Yeah. Like I think he even says like, I can't condemn you to do this. And like, and then even in that scene at the museum, there's kind of this moment where like, I don't know, some crazy Francis Ford Coppola shit happens. And like, I think a wolf gets out of the pen and like it approaches her and snarls at her. And he's just like, he shouts something Transylvanian at it and the wolf instantly like heals.
Right.
And he's like, Mina, come here. It's okay. And then they're just petting this wolf and he's just like, he likes you. And then they pet the wolf for like a really long time, actually.
Yeah.
I was watching that shot and I'm like, are we going to cut? Like, so like, as far as like a meet cute or like a first date goes, like I do kind of buy it. But then there's a scene 20 minutes earlier where he's in full Wolfman garb, just having intercourse with Lucy.
Well, and again, this goes back to what I was saying before, is that if you really stop and think about the plot of this movie and like some of the ideas and the storyline stuff, you get lost in the details. Like it never explains why Dracula has decided to come to London or why Dracula's bought 10 homes in London or anything like that. Like any detail, if you pull on it long enough, comes up empty.
I think they do explain it a little more in the book. I think
they do.
In the implication is just wants some young blood.
Yeah, and I didn't get that. Like I was kind of lost because I was like, okay, well, he's into Mina and he knows that she's going to be there because of the picture that Harkness has or that Harker has. There's that, but like, why was he going to London in the first place? Like, and stuff like that just like, you get lost in and like, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you really want to pay attention to the story.
Well, I do find it funny. And like, I'm not trying to take shots at like 100-year-old book, but I love the idea that this like 400-year-old monster still has to like deal with real estate agents, Well, he needs somewhere to sleep, right? Yeah.
Well, and also, if you keep everything above board, that's how gangsters get away with stuff, right? It's not gangsters don't get caught with murder. Gangsters get caught when they don't pay their taxes.
Yeah, exactly, right?
So I mean, I buy it.
I mean, Dracula's 400 years old. He knows to pay his taxes.
I buy it. I just didn't understand why. I was just like, what? Like, did we forget that he had some sort of purpose for being here, and it wasn't Mina? Because like that's what the story becomes. And I was like, well, I feel like they should have pivoted more out of the story that they were doing.
Another wrinkle is that he also seduces her best friend Lucy.
Right.
And I think maybe the implication is he's just getting his hooks in her for like the fresh blood and maybe to like keep a psychic link on her so he can keep an eye on Mina or something.
Well, and even that, like, I think that's again the monster of Dracula and like the eroticism to Dracula, right? Like finding this, virgin woman who's like young and sexy and like, and taking advantage of her in that way. That's kind of like, it's almost these two competing narratives of Dracula.
It's very much kind of like a Madonna horror complex kind of thing, right? Like,
right.
I can have sex with this whore that I don't care about, but like I can't defile this pure, perfect woman that I'm madly in love with. I will say, another thing that counts towards, I guess you could say, this relationship's favor is like Mina, like there is that scene where Jonathan goes to see her at the beginning and he's like, no, I have to go, I'm Keanu Reeves, and I'm paraphrasing. She's like, oh, and she's really sad to see him go, and she like kind of pulls him close and gives him like a really steamy, really passionate kiss, and it's a little like, okay, like this woman has needs.
Right.
There's a heat to this woman.
Yeah.
That
And that goes back to like the repressed Victorian kind of era, right?
Right, where you weren't allowed to express any of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then there's Keanu Reeves, who, there's not a lot of. He doesn't have much of a pulse in this movie, let's be honest. So I can kind of.
I think he just, to me, and let's do the Keanu Reeves now. To me, he comes off as like a surfer dude. Honestly, fits for me because he's like this young, in love, real estate agent kind of character. He's this hot dude who doesn't have a whole lot going on up top, maybe.
Yeah, well.
and neither does the character have a whole lot going on up top, kind of thing, right? And like, I think that it fits really well, and if you're looking at this movie in the sense of having fun with it, like I did, I actually thought it brought some fun to this otherwise like nothing character.
Well, I think it works as a counterpoint to, because Keanu Reeves, like intentionally or not, is very stiff and awkward in this role.
Yeah, like he's young and he feels vulnerable even in the performance, and I think that also kind of does the character justice, right? Like
I think it makes him an interesting counterpoint to Dracula, who is not vulnerable at all and not repressed at all, right? Like this guy is. One of my favorite scenes is when they're having dinner and he's going over like the history of his clan, wink wink, and Keanu Reeves makes a slightly inopportune joke, and Dracula like puts a sword in his face, and he's just like, oh, like something like, what devil or witch could match the blood of Attila, which still flows through these veins?
Right. Yeah, and he just kind of laughs at something that like isn't actually meant to be funny.
He laughs at the wrong point, right?
Yeah.
Which I have a bad habit of doing.
Yeah,
public,
I mean everybody's done it before, right? Like I do it all the time, probably.
I remember, you can cut this out, I don't care. I was working with this very serious young man at a serving job a year or so ago, and he just started going off about like, how he didn't need an education and he had all the skills he needed and it wasn't fair, and like he was just so serious, and I just laughed, right, and I didn't mean to, but it was just, he was so serious and so intense. I just went poof, yeah, and then he got flustered and ran away, and I was like, oh come on, I didn't, all right, shit. Like,
right.
Don't take yourself so seriously, young man.
Yeah, and like even like the accent gets a lot of hate, and like I can understand that. I've already said on the primer episode that I do have kind of a blindness for accents.
I think he's fine. Like it's funny, I was reading the Wikipedia page for this movie. There's a whole section dedicated to Keanu Reeves' performance. Yeah. I'm like, oof, sorry, buddy. But honestly, no, I think the complaints are overstated. I think he's perfectly fine. I
kind of get it if you're looking for a gothic horror movie, but that's not the vibe that I pulled from this movie, and that's not the way that I was enjoying this movie.
If you look at it more as a comedy, he's kind of like the straight man of the movie, right?
Yeah.
He's just reacting to all the crazy shit going on.
Exactly, and that's what I took from this movie, and that's how I approached this movie, and it was completely by accident, but it worked for me.
By the way, I did want to share my favorite scene. It's where I think it's the shaving scene where he's shaving his beard with a straight razor. Dracula comes in and he's like, and he kind of like, he's like, here, let me shave you. And then he like turns over and like licks the blood off the razor.
And he's like saying how it's dangerous to be bleeding in like here.
Yeah, right. By the way, I think I read that Gary Oldman was drunk off his ass during that scene, which he probably was.
Which works for the scene, right? Because that's something that I think crops up in a lot of Dracula appearances and other types of media, is that as soon as blood is flowing freely, Dracula becomes like this drunk addict, basically, right?
Yeah, then he's gotta like repeat his mantra, like Harker is friend, not food. Mm-hmm. But then they kind of talk, and Keanu Reeves gets flustered, and he talks about like all the strange things that he's seeing, and then they hear wolves in the distance, and then Dracula leaves, and then Keanu looks out the window, and you just see Dracula being like in full Spider-Man mode, just crawling down the walls. That is my favorite scene in this movie. Just like Spider-Man Dracula just running around like, fuck it, I don't care what he thinks. I don't care if he sees.
Yeah, it's absurd and weird, and I'm here for it.
Yeah, and Keanu Reeves is just kind of like, oh, like he barely reacts to it.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, what would you do if you saw that, right? If I looked out my window and I saw you like scaling the walls, I'd just be like, oh, okay, I'm going back to bed.
It gives off like a Trios of Horror kind of vibe, you know?
Which is funny because they did a vampire Trios of Horror in the 90s and they lifted Mr. Burns, like Dracula's costume, and put him on Mr. Burns.
Yeah.
So
Which works, but
it super works. By the way, I did want to say, I don't want to talk too much shit about this movie, but like the thing that I actually love the most is the costume design.
yeah.
Like,
And that actually won an Oscar, I believe.
it deserves to, right? Like, it's a very bold outfit they put Dracula in with like
Yeah.
I don't even know how to describe the hair and like the red flowing robe.
That's
and
actually the thing I think that, you know, is maybe the most remembered thing of this entire movie as well.
the costume design.
Yeah.
I don't doubt it.
Well, and
like,
even just like that image of Dracula that you're describing as well.
yeah, and like it looks ridiculous, but it somehow works. And like even in the opening where like he's got that like serpentine red armor.
Oh, that was sick.
I was looking at that. I'm like, I might steal that someday.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the costume designs and the sets are they work really well, right?
Yeah.
I guess it was reported that we had mentioned Batman 1989 in last week's episode, and I guess Jack Nicholson's advice to his co-stars was just let the costumes do the acting. And like watching this movie though, you're like, you could have just let the costumes do the acting.
Yeah,
But-
honestly. That's part of like the charm of this too, is that you get to see Gary Oldman just ham it up in all these different Dracula costumes and versions.
The many faces of Dracula.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's.
Did you have a favorite like appearance of his? Is it the red one?
I actually kind of like his like handsome young Dracula outfit where
Like the
he's
Spaniard almost?
kind of it reminded me of Bloodborne actually.
Yeah,
Where
I
he's-
thought of that as well when I was watching this movie.
Yeah, like he's got the top hat and like he's all very decked out and
Long
he's got
hair.
yeah, and he's got the blue sunglasses.
The sunglasses are sick.
I'm like, nice. Actually, this guy, I've been looking into like my own fashion lately and like how can I lead into my aesthetic, and I saw
Yeah.
that I'm like, this guy knows
Yeah.
his aesthetic.
Yes,
Nice.
very well. Very cool looking. Yeah. You know what? That's a great one to point out.
His like Wolfman costume or his Wolfman form was a little ridiculous
Yeah.
when he's having sex with Lucy.
I think that one's the weak point of the costumes. I would agree because it doesn't feel as Dracula as the rest of them.
Yeah, I'm like, are you a werewolf now? What's going on?
I thought that one kind of stood out or was a little jarring to me as well. The scene itself is pretty wild, and I liked the scene.
There's a lot of wild scenes in this movie.
yeah, and that kind of speaks to the eroticism that's in this movie. Like, this is a borderline erotic film, I would say. Like, and that's kind of
you could maybe generously call it like an erotic thriller.
yeah, like borderline. And like, I think that if you've never read the book Dracula before, or like experienced maybe some of the more erotic versions of Dracula, you wouldn't expect that. Like, actually, that was something that Jess said like she wasn't expecting, was how erotic this movie was. And
Well, and again, I think if you read the book, he's not erotic at all. He's gross. And he's gross at different points in this movie.
Right.
But
I think it works for the character really well, though. And I think that it's something that, you know, I brought up 2004's Van Helsing, but that's something that I think is also carried or lifted from this movie, is Dracula being this erotic character in a repressed society, basically.
very sensual, yeah. Yeah, even that scene where he kind of meets cute with Mina, it could almost be read as like, you know, this foreigner who doesn't really understand the customs, right?
Right.
Yeah, he's just like, I'm just having a conversation. What's going on here,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, and that's actually something that comes up. Like, I was reading about some of the themes of the original book, and there is kind of maybe the other kind of questions,
like
and
the
a little-
fear of
like
xenophobia.
some xenophobia tones, and I think that this movie kind of turns that on its head a little bit in a sense, and kind of maybe toys with that and doesn't take that as seriously as the original novel did, for better, obviously.
Yeah, right. Actually, okay, I feel like we kind of got sidetracked. Going back to like Dracula.
got very sidetracked.
Yeah, going back to Dracula and Mina's relationship, I put in air quotes, right? So the ending, they just beat the shit out of him at the end of this movie.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like, good, get him. But
well, and that even speaks to like all of the characters that show up too, right?
yeah, the three suitors, Van Helsing, Jonathan is there for some reason.
Yeah.
And and then Mina, and then they just beat the crap out of him. Also, I like the idea, and this is present in the original book, that it's not like you need some super specific method to kill him. You just need to stab him a bunch.
And then cut his head off.
And then cut his head off, and you're good. You got him. So
Right.
it's Highlander rules. So, so they beat the crap out of him. Mina grabs a gun. They retreat into a chapel. Like he's kneeling on the ground, and he's in a kind of like a half monster form, and he's stealing lines from Jesus, being like, you know, like, why have you forsaken me? Or like, God has forsaken me. Or
there was even a moment of "It is finished."
It is finished. Yeah, I'm like, hey, come on.
Yeah.
Like
Seven sealed.
yeah, like, hey, we already did that one.
Yeah.
So, and then like God's light kind of shines down on him, and he transforms into handsome young Dracula, and then they kiss. And no, she kisses him when he's still in monster form. So I'm just like, okay, like she genuinely loves this weird creature.
Right.
And then God's light kind of comes down and shines on him, and he turns back to normal. And then she cuts his head off, which was apparently George Lucas's suggestion.
Yes.
He was the one who was like, no, no, Francis, she needs to cut his head off. I don't know if that's George Lucas's voice, but I'm owning it. So like watching that scene again, I know maybe the mistake I made is taking this movie too seriously, but like, I'm like, why is this guy redeemed? Like, what did he do that was redeemable?
And I'm not even sure that he was redeemed, because in the end they still kill him and cut his head off, right? Like,
right, but then the camera pans up, and there's kind of that shot of two people on the ceiling, and the implication was like, oh, him and Elizabeth have been reunited in heaven or something.
I guess that's not what I necessarily took from it. I guess it's just like the conclusion that this character is finally at peace, that he's, you know, accepted their destiny, that like they were not meant to be together or something.
Potentially, yeah.
And that, you know, they were, maybe their relationship had meaning all of these years ago, and through unfortunate circumstance
And lots of murder.
They were torn away from each other. There's kind of an acceptance, I guess, at some point to everything. And I don't know that he's necessarily redeemed, because, again, how do you redeem a character like that? It's almost like, you know, the Darth Vader kind of thing.
Why
right?
is he quoting like Christian? Why is he quoting Jesus Christ at the end? That's my whole thing.
Yeah.
And I get that, like, they kind of, what I do think is interesting about this movie is that they kind of frame vampirism in very Catholic terms, right?
Right.
The scene where he stabs the altar, blood gushes out, and he drinks it. Like, his vampirism is almost like a twisted parody of like the crucifixion.
Yes.
Right? So, you know, but then he's dying and he's like quoting Jesus and blah, 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 blah. I was a little like, I don't buy it. Like, come on.
Fair enough. Well, I guess I didn't read into it as much. I didn't really think about it that much. Again, because that comes back to what I was saying before, in that this is more of a vibe movie than a substance movie. And
right. So I was looking at the substance of the scene, and I'm like,
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I actually did watch this movie on YouTube. Okay, don't tell Coppola, but there's a few, like, the full movie is on YouTube in a couple places if you know where to look. I was reading some of the comments, and I think the top comment of one of them was like, I feel so bad for Dracula, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, why?
Well, and that's actually something really interesting as well, right? That in our modern cinema and our modern approach to a lot of old stories is something that has been, I don't know, it's an adaptation choice that a lot of people are making right now, in that we need to give our villains more empathy, or like we need to build these tragic backstories into these villains to explain why they're a villain, or like to maybe justify why they're doing their actions, or why their actions are justified to them.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm all here for a sympathetic villain, but I mean, that final scene almost felt like they were rounding out some redemption arc for a guy who probably doesn't deserve it, but then I guess maybe you can say that like his genuine affection for Mina and like genuinely wanting to protect her from this curse would maybe count, right?
Well, and
Was that a pun? I was talking about Dracula and I said could count.
I guess.
Okay, no pun intended.
Nice.
Boom.
Here's the thing is, in that sense, like, he's been on this rampage for the past 400 plus years, and suddenly he's offered the opportunity to make right what he felt was wronged or stolen from him, or even just like the church and their views on suicide, right, at that point in time, and still probably now.
Maybe I don't know.
There's this moment where it's like, okay, I have this opportunity now, and it's like, oh my God, like, has everything that I've done the past 400 years been a mistake? And like he does have that moment where he has every opportunity to make her a vampire, and he pulls back, and he's like, this is a mistake.
Actually, I'm going to dovetail my own opinion for a second. I'm going to take a left turn and talk about Better Call Saul, one of my all-time favorite TV shows.
Right.
I won't get into the whole story or recap anything for those of you at home, but watching the final season of Better Call Saul 2 years ago, I felt like the hidden theme of the show, or like the hidden message of the show, was it doesn't matter how much bad you've done, there's still time.
Mm-hmm.
If you start being a good person now, you can change your fate.
Right.
So maybe that's something similar to what this movie was going for, is like, it doesn't matter how terrible and how atrocious this monster, literal monster is, he can still be redeemed by like one genuine, good, selfless act. And did I just talk myself out of my own opinion? I don't know. Maybe I did, but
you've at least presented the idea, and you don't necessarily even have to agree with it or agree with the movie's success in executing it. But
yeah,
that may be what they were going for.
Maybe if they had leaned more into the love story angle on him.
And that's, again, like, I think that there's so many different threads that they're pulling from, because there's this really original story of Dracula and love lost and why Dracula became who he is. And then there's like the stuff with the homes and like all of these like things pulled from the book, and you know, the brief like mention of the Demeter and stuff like that. Like, we need to hit these checkpoints in the book. But if they had chose to either not go down this love story route, or if they had chose down to fully embrace it and maybe get rid of some of the stuff that was going on in the novel, I think that...
And by the way, let me just say, there is something there. There is something inherently compelling about an immortal creature falling in love with a mortal woman and being like, but I'm immortal and I'm a monster, and like,
right,
I could turn you, but I can't because I don't want to condemn you to the same life that I have. Like, there is something very compelling there, and I think the Twilight books really probably capitalized on it really well. Have you ever read any of the Twilight books? Oh, okay. I've been thinking I wouldn't mind, because I totally missed the bubble on that one. And I was one of those assholes who was like, ugh, Twilight's so dumb. But I wouldn't mind reading those books now that the craze has died down.
Well, I'm sure Jess has copies of them somewhere over there.
I'm going to read them and then start my own podcast called Michael Reads Twilight. And it'll be 4 episodes of me just being like, what did I agree to? Why am I doing this? Subscribe to our Patreon and we can make it happen. Yeah. Maybe when we do start a Patreon, that could be our thing. Like, if you reach every tier is just a new level of humiliation for me. Like, now he's reading the Twilight books. Now he's, getting a bad hair transplant. Like,
nice.
Now he's doing this. Anyways. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess it's just that final scene kind of rubbed me the wrong way, where I'm like, why are you quoting Jesus? Why is this framed in such a way?
Right. And that went over my head. I didn't care.
Okay.
Because I was having fun, and
this is what happens when
the movie had to conclude.
Yeah,
at some point.
Well, the movie's got to end.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I do really like that she cuts his head off, though.
Mm-hmm.
It gave Mina... I actually liked Mina quite a lot as a character.
Yeah, so did I.
Like, she has spunk, for lack of a better term, Like,
well, I think that most of the characters did. Like, again, the only character that I felt didn't quite land was Keanu, although I appreciated what he was doing or what the movie was doing with it. Anthony Hopkins is clearly one of my favorite performances of the movie, one of my favorite characters of the movie. But each of the 3 suitors brings a unique style and perspective to the film. Like, we've got the Bowie knife guy, and that's hilarious.
The Texan.
Yeah, Carrie Ells.
Everything he's saying is just so Kentucky Fried Texan.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
The doctor is really interesting, and like...
I did want to bring up, there's that scene where, so the doctor is treating Renfield, who's gone fucking insane. He's gone bug-eating insane,
right.
And there's something weird going on between Renfield and the doctor. Like, there's that one scene where he's like, I don't know, they're like talking, and he's musing, the doctor is musing in his journals like, oh, if I could just unlock the secrets of that brilliant mind. And I was like, I don't know about brilliant, man. And then there's kind of like hanging out. You know what I'm talking about? They're kind of like hanging out, and at one point, like, the doctor kind of rolls up his sleeves, like implying like, are you like getting high with your patient? Like, are you guys doing heroin together? Like, there's something almost like weirdly romantic about the way they're talking to each other. I was just like, I wanted more scenes with these guys. Like, what's going on here?
I think Renfield is kind of underutilized in this movie because, again, like his performance is great and it's a really weird and eccentric character, but I also don't understand why he's in this movie.
Master!
Yeah, like I really don't understand what his place in the story is or anything. Like,
well, and like maybe this is just me getting distracted, but it seems like he just kind of fell out of the movie too.
yeah.
Like he spends the whole movie in a padded cell just talking about like how his master promised him immortality and wanting to help him and blah, blah, blah. But then at some point they're hiding Mina in the asylum and he kind of looks at her and he kind of is almost like, it's like he kind of betrays Dracula because he won't,
Right.
he's too smitten by her, or he recognizes that she's a pure soul and he won't betray her to Dracula. And then there's the line later where Dracula's like, Renfield, you've betrayed me. And I was like, did he?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
I think that this is something that actually, if anything, what we do in the shadows does a lot better and a lot more interesting is their take on familiars and like how the familiars get the short end of the stick and, and like these promises that essentially it's the promise of the great man on a character.
I'll make you immortal, don't worry about it.
Yeah, and like and how always their promises of to their followers are never actually like executed,
never honored
Yeah.
unless, under extreme duress.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great show.
It is a great show.
It is a great
The
show.
first 2 seasons are great. I don't know about after that.
Yeah,
Things take
it dropped
turns.
off pretty quickly. Guillermo was the most interesting character.
See, I love Colin Robinson, but yeah, he was the most.
He had the most compelling. You know what? Actually, yeah, no. Guillermo in What We Do in the Shadows is almost the redemption of the Renfield type character.
Right. Again, I liked his performance a lot, and I thought this character was really interesting. But then the whole time it was just like, why is this character in this movie? Is this character necessary to this film? I don't think so.
Yeah, and like, don't get me wrong, Tom Waits is incredible.
Yeah, I like I said, I enjoy the character. I just don't understand the why.
Yeah, and maybe that's where maybe we need to read the book where it comes out a little bit more. Wasn't there a Renfield movie last year with Nicolas Cage as Dracula?
Yeah, like the like weakest connection to the Dracula movie or original.
I just heard it was bad. I never saw it.
Yeah, I it's like a modern day Renfield approach story to it, and it's like Renfield's perspective and this and that kind of thing.
Did you see it?
No.
Okay.
I have a general idea of what it's about. Jess has been wanting to watch it. We might end up watching it now that we've watched this. But
I'll watch it with you guys.
All right.
I'd like to see Nicolas Cage as Dracula.
Yeah, I mean, I always love Nicolas Cage and doing weird performances.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Should we talk about Van Helsing? I feel like he's the only guy we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, let's talk him, and we'll round out the characters because I do have other thoughts about the movie that I feel like we haven't touched on, and I really do want to talk about at some point. So I guess we have kind of talked about his appearance, and when he shows up in this movie, and he has like these really like funny lines. Like he's just, and I don't know if it's Anthony Hopkins just like understanding the tone of this movie better than anybody else in this film up to this point in time, or if it's a case of just like Anthony Hopkins tapping into these lines and like just seeing the humor in some of these lines.
Well, it's funny because like he essentially plays Van Helsing as like, I'm just going to say a lunatic, like a jabbering lunatic, right? So when we first meet him, he's actually, giving a lecture on like syphilis and bats or something.
Right.
And then he just lets the bat bite him and then just licks his finger. And I'm like, dude, I think that's how COVID got started. But, he goes to see Lucy and, they get her some fresh blood. And then, he's in the graveyard talking to the 3 suitors and he's just like, he's chiding the doctor for not having enough imagination. He's like, do you think there are things that your eyes cannot see? Like, blah, blah, blah. And then the doctor is just like, well, I suppose he's humoring him. He's like, I guess maybe something swooped in is sucking her blood. And then at one point he goes and looks and turns and he's not there anymore. And he just steps out from behind a gravestone like, waha, like, just like, were you just pranking them? Like, what, did you drop something? Like, what was back there? But
no, he was just pranking them. That's what he was doing. He was like messing with them. Like, oh, like don't always believe what your eyes tell you, or don't always like science isn't the only answer here.
Right. So like, I kind of like the portrayal of him as like a brilliant scientist who's also kind of insane. He talks about stuff like astral projection and like all that stuff.
Yeah.
He kind of, I'm just making this connection now. He's kind of almost like a Dan Aykroyd type.
Yeah, a
You
little
know?
bit.
Like,
See, I don't think I got mad scientist from him at all. Like, I got eccentric from him. Like, he's very, very intelligent, and like he's miles ahead of this time period and the medicines and stuff like that. But he also takes into account this religious side of this and like understanding, okay, well, I don't know what I don't know. So we've got to approach this from all angles and see what works, kind of thing, right?
he's kind of like the ultimate like Renaissance man, where it's like, yes, I'm a brilliant scientist. I also like carry crucifixes with me, and I'll fight vampires.
Right.
You know,
And he's also like really funny. Like he says the line, like, I laughed out loud at least twice to lines that Van Helsing had. The first one was when he requests the doctor to at night bring him some postmortem knives, and the doctor's like, we're going to do an autopsy on Lucy. And he says, no, not exactly. I just want to cut off her head and take out her heart. And like the way that line is delivered
so
is
casual,
so funny. And there's something like that. And then later in the movie, when he brings up, no, Mr. Morris, bullets will not harm him. He must be beheaded. I suggest you use your big Bowie knife. Like stuff like that. And there's even like a moment where he says a really comedic line when he's sitting with
I was gonna bring that up. Like, he's having dinner with Mina and Jonathan, and like, I think he had just killed. He's like, oh, like, eat. You're gonna need your strength. And then it's something like, what happened to Lucy? He's like, oh, well, we drove a stake through her heart and cut her heart off.
Yeah.
And he's just eating while he's talking, and
Right.
they're like, ugh.
he reminds me of a person who is very intelligent who doesn't take life too seriously, and I appreciate that.
I do indeed. Yeah, like, this guy loves fighting vampires.
Yeah.
Like, he is so happy to be fighting Dracula.
Yeah, this is like the wolf of this movie for me. Like, as soon as this character shows up, I was like, no notes, I'm in. Like, this movie just went up a whole point for having Anthony Hopkins portray Van Helsing.
You know who he kind of reminded me of, and this is a weird connection? Like Rick Sanchez from Rick and Morty.
Yeah,
In the sense
that's
that
exactly the type that I'm going for
like
here.
brilliant, but also eccentric and also kind of irresponsible.
Right.
You know?
Yep.
Like, this guy should probably have his medical license taken away, but
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. Like, I don't think that this movie would be as rewatchable, and I'm gonna go there actually.
Oh wait,
without
I
him.
just want to say, I think my favorite moment, Van Helsing moment, is when he kills the brides of Dracula, and then he cuts off their heads, puts them in a sack, and like chucks them off a bridge.
Right.
But when he throws it off a bridge, he's like, "Yeah!" He's like, "Gah, get off my bridge!" Like, that was my favorite moment.
Yeah, he's great. I
And
love.
I wonder if that was a specific direction from Coppola. Like, so when you throw the heads off the bridge, I want you to like shriek out a sound. And he's like, I got it, Francis.
Yeah. No, he understood the assignment really well.
It's funny. I was watching this movie, and I was like, was this before or after Silence of the Lambs? And then I checked, it was after.
Yes.
So I'm like, imagine watching Sir Anthony Hopkins giving the performance of a lifetime as Hannibal Lecter, terrifying, charming, whatever. And then next year or 2 years later or whatever, you go to the theaters and you see this, and you're just like, huh.
I think this performance is ahead of its time, if anything.
You
Like,
think so?
yeah,
Okay.
like you could even compare his performance to like a Robert Downey Jr. Iron Man.
I see the connection. I wouldn't make that connection, but I see the connection you're making.
Yeah, there's just something very charismatic and comedic, and
There's like this manic energy about him,
Yeah,
too, right?
yeah. That's kind of the other thing that I was thinking about this movie and that I wanted to talk about is just like the overall tone and like the style of this movie, because to me that's the pinnacle of this movie, is that the way that it's shot and the way that it's stylized, it's like it's in conversation with the 100 years of movies that preceded it and the 100 years of the Dracula novel and the monster movies of like the 20s, 30s, 40s, and onwards. It understands what those movies, how those movies were shot, and like the style of those films, and then it takes all of that and it kind of blends it all together, and it leans heavily into that. It's like, let's not go for the easy like CGI route. Like, let's not take easy like special effects and add in like the cool stuff of this time period. Let's try to like keep this grounded and keep this like here, physically here, and like have the characters, like let's do tricks with the camera to like present this story in a way that feels more in a way it feels more realistic,
like
but
authentic. Yeah.
yeah, and it makes the movie and the tone and like the setting and the way that it's shot, all of it makes it timeless in a sense, because it's both like harkening back to all of this prior period of cinema, but at the same time, it's shot by somebody who is a master at their craft, and it's shot in like understanding how all of that works in the past, and it's shot in a modern perspective. And so like coming at this movie like in 2024, I was like, this movie feels at the same time, it kind of feels a little timeless in a sense.
Kind of, yeah. And I was very impressed when I learned that like this whole movie is practical effects.
Yeah.
Like I think the blue flames are the only CG in this whole movie.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else, like the rats on the walls, like those weird composite shots of like the book with like the train in the background, like that was all, they made that all, like it was all there.
Yeah. I gotta commend that. Like that's something that I always appreciate. Like I am practical over special effects, like
especially in this time period when CGI looked like shit.
Yeah, absolutely. And like sometimes it kind of works, and like Starship Troopers is my greatest example of this schlocky, like poorly CG'd everything kind of working to the film. But in a movie like this, like I feel like if you were to watch this movie in another 30 years, like I think that it's still going to be as easy of a watch as it is now. Like, I don't think a lot's going to change because, it is a movie that understands the limitations of the software that it has, and then decides, let's throw all that out and like make something practical. Let's reference all of this past cinema. Like, I understand the past in cinema. Let's use all of this understanding to our advantage. And like, they're not treading any new waves with this, but in doing that and mashing everything up, it feels really like there's something unique about it.
Yeah, definitely.
Something special about it.
Yeah, I mean, like, and I praise like the costume design and all that too. Like, there is something to like the aesthetic of this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you like your Gothic Victorian cheese with extra cheese, you'll be right at home in this movie.
Yeah. But like even that, like I really genuinely had fun with that stuff. Like I had fun with some of the weird dialogue and like the almost comedic, but like, should this be comedic? Should I be laughing right now kind of moments? Sometimes you just gotta relax and have a good time. I don't know.
Sometimes maybe, wow. Are you talking to the viewers or are you talking to me right now?
Everybody.
Okay.
So sometimes you just gotta relax, man. Go do some bowling or something. I don't know.
Yeah, fuck it. Let's go bowling. Yeah. Has there been like a secret theme to all the movies this year? Is that
maybe that'd be a cool wrap up?
The year 2024 Vintage Cinema Rewind. That's the central thesis.
Yeah. Let's
relax, go bowling, and fight vampires.
Yeah. All right.
So let's do it.
No notes. Let's wrap the podcast up as is right now.
Yeah. No, I have nothing. I have nothing left to say.
No, that's epic. I don't know. I don't really have too much else like I wanted to talk about story-wise. Like I mentioned briefly the Demeter Journal. I kind of wish that we had more time on the Demeter to see
that really
the
comes and goes quickly. I think, doesn't Anthony Hopkins even voice the captain?
He might. I'm actually not sure.
I think he does. And that to me just reads of like, fuck it. Get in there, Anthony. We just need a voice for this.
And I have a feeling, if I remember correctly, that is kind of something that just is quickly glossed over in the novel as well. And there is kind of a 2023 movie that is completely focused, like The Last Voyage of the Demeter, which I haven't seen, and I heard it's not the best movie ever. But
oh, is that a Dracula thing?
Yeah.
Ah.
And that's the thing is like I think that movie, the trailer and everything, like really kind of leaned into that this is a Dracula story, whereas I think a lot of people would have been better off not knowing some of the details of that and going in as like, oh, like this is gonna be some weird horror movie on a Victorian ship kind of thing.
And then you're
right?
like, just kidding, it's Dracula.
Yeah. I like when movies do this, and this is something that I could even like in kind of keeping relevant, like I could reference with John Wick, like this bigger world, all of this stuff kind of happening, and like, us sometimes you gotta like get through these interesting parts, because maybe if you were to dive too much into like one interesting piece, it becomes less interesting exploring the idea. And so I just
kind
like that
of
kind of
yeah,
world-building
I get
stuff.
it. I actually completely forgot about the Last Voyage of the Demeter thing. That like, And that does happen in the book where he starts picking off crew members one by one.
Right.
I liked the scene where he's wandering around the streets of London and he's filmed with like an old-timey camera. That was pretty cute. I was like, all right, nice.
Yep. Oh, only other thing I want to say is that I thought the movie was lit really well. I don't know if you appreciated that at any point in time, but there was like several moments where I was like, this feels like very naturally lit. Like it doesn't feel like they're sitting in front of like, big lights or anything like that. Like, it feels just like
feels just right.
Yeah, like the candles are the only things emitting light in this scene or something like that. But at the same time, everything's visible. Like, this isn't a movie that the whole time I'm like, I got to turn the brightness up on my TV.
What the hell
or
is this? It's not like the long night at Winterfell or anything.
No, like, I thought that should be commended, and that's why I wanted to bring it up.
I may not have fully vibed with this movie, but I have to marvel at, like, the mastery on display in terms of, like, the costume design, the set design, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Apparently, Francis Ford Coppola originally had this idea for a movie with no sets. Like, he just wanted to make it look more like a theatrical performance.
Oh, I see.
And then
that's just a play at that point.
Right. And so somebody very wisely was like, no, like it's a movie. It needs sets.
Right. Interesting. So sequels, prequels, and reboots. Obviously, we've talked about how this is based on the 1897 story by Bram Stoker.
Stoker, not Stroker. You corrected me on that earlier.
Yep.
I don't think I've screwed up yet, but
I don't
we'll
think
see.
so, but we'll see in the editing room. Which we talked about it. Neither of us had read this in the primer. This is one of the most faithful adaptations of this novel, and I actually read like some of the changes that he made in this, and we talked about the biggest one being the love story.
Yeah.
Honestly, the other changes he made are like pretty small. Like I don't even want to get into them because they're so small.
They're so negligible.
Yeah. Like it's pretty commendable that Francis Ford Coppola was able to turn this story into something,
a full-blown novel. Yeah.
I guess the only thing that I would ask you is like, how did the style of the journal readings and stuff work for you in the movie?
I don't think it fully made the transition onto the screen that well.
I kind of agree. Like, I feel like it was almost overused. Like, I think...
Yeah. And I mean, I can understand wanting to do it for fidelity.
I think that if it had been used, like, sparingly, like, in the opening as, like, okay, this is kind of a prologue, and then maybe in the end as, like, a conclusion epilogue of the story or something like that. But I think that it gets used a lot to convey the character's feelings and stuff like that. And
well, I think the big problem I had with it is that it felt almost like an afterthought.
Yeah.
Like, there are some scenes with, like, journal entries and stuff, and, like, some caption would appear on the screen and all that stuff. And you're just like, like, I don't know. I feel like if you're going to do it, like, commit to it.
Well, and this is something that actually we haven't talked about yet. Dracula's shadow in the film. And
yeah,
I think that this is, again, another highlight of the film is the way that it portrays Dracula's shadow and that it shows his true inner monologue almost, in a sense, like how he's truly feeling, or like, you know, what his thoughts are on the characters that he is dealing with, or like where his focal point is at certain times and certain shots. And I think that if we had only seen that, if that was the only inner monologue that we had was Dracula's shadow, I think that actually serves the story a little bit better, is if we almost don't even know what the rest of the characters are thinking, but Dracula is this big open wound.
Yeah, right? No, I get that. I just feel that, like, it works very well in the text, but, like, in a film, a audio-visual medium, I don't think it quite made the leap.
Overutilizing of it, I think, is what killed it for me.
Maybe even underutilizing of it. I almost felt like whenever it popped up, I'm like, oh, we're doing this again, huh? All right. And then...
You mean Dracula's shadow, or do you mean the journal entries and stuff?
Journal entries, yeah.
Okay.
I would have liked to actually see more of Dracula's shadow. I mean... Yeah. It seems like we had a lot of that in the first act in Transylvania, and then they just kind of dropped it.
Yeah, I agree.
Reminded me of Dr. Falice from The Princess and the Frog, who I'm sure they kind of stole that from. Or The Princess and the Frog stole it from this movie. There's a scene where the bad guy high-fives his own shadow. Huh? I would have loved to have seen Dracula high-fiving his own shadow.
I have never seen that movie.
Pretty good.
When did it come out?
Like 2008.
Oh, okay, so it is after this. Okay,
yeah.
Fair enough. I feel like the shadow thing is definitely... That's not one of the things that this movie created about Dracula, right? Like, there's lots of other stuff that this movie originated with Dracula. And
yeah.
but...
I think this is unique to this movie. I
Is
couldn't
it?
really say.
I
Yeah.
don't know. Something we'll have to look it up later.
I've never
but-
seen this in anything else with like a vampire's shadow doing shadowy things. I don't know how successful this movie was critically or commercially, but like,
Yes and yes.
yeah, okay,
Both-
great.
Both pretty good.
Yeah, I think it had a pretty big impact on vampire fiction going forward.
Some of the imagery of Dracula, like being, this handsome guy with the long hair and I can't remember if it was a mustache or a goatee, but like some of that stylization, not the, like crow's peak, like wearing
The Bela
a cape.
Lugosi kind of
Yeah,
thing.
like that kind of pivoted him into a more charismatic, like character that you want to be around kind of thing.
Yeah, with
more
a-
erotic character almost
with
in a
a
sense.
moving shadow.
Yeah. But yeah, no, this has been like adapted so many times, like literally countless times. The character itself has been in like Creative Commons, like available for free use for almost 100 years, I think now.
Probably, yeah.
So, but actually of note of all of this is that Bram Stoker actually wrote the first theater screenplay of this in 1897 when he completed the book.
Oh,
So
good for him.
yeah, and part of the reason why I did that was to hold on to the license of it, the adaptations and everything. He had to write it like that so that he could get it. But at the same time, like I think that's interesting that he wrote the story and immediately was like, okay, is this is this something that would be adaptable, and like how would I adapt it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how much, when you're writing a book, for example, like how much are you really thinking about like what another medium might do or take or remove from your story, right? Like, does that even cross your mind?
No, I mean, my mom and friends and partners have talked about like, who would you want to play so and so if this were made into a movie, and we'll talk about it.
Right.
I'll do like fan castings in my own head.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm just trying to get a book published.
Yeah.
I just want a book in stores, and then we can worry about that other stuff afterwards.
Exactly. That's what I'm
So-
saying. Like, I think that most of the time, like, that isn't a priority, and that doesn't need to be a priority necessarily.
No, why would it be?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously every author wants to see their book turned into a good movie.
Yep.
But
Or like not remove stuff that's important to them.
Yeah,
or like
really.
mess with core themes or ideas of the movie or
Yeah.
novel.
I can see how that would. Yeah. Anyways,
Yeah.
in 5 years, when my first book gets turned into a terrible movie, this podcast will go in a very different direction.
Yeah. I guess the only other thing that I wanted to mention was Nosferatu being like one of the other more famous adaptations.
And I think that was the thing where they wanted to do Dracula, but they couldn't get the rights, so they made him like what, Count Orlok or something?
Yeah, and it's like a very liberalized approach to the story. Like I think it's very different, while still kind of following the same narrative outline.
I think it's
more or less.
basically just Dracula, but like with a fake mustache on or something.
Yeah, he's a little bit more creepy of a vampire.
Oh,
Like,
that
he's got-
Nosferatu look? Yeah.
Yeah.
Ugh.
And there's actually like Nosferatu is being remade and coming out this year in a few weeks, I think.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, with Willem Dafoe, right?
I don't actually know.
Oh, okay.
I don't know many details about it, but I'm kind of interested. I've never actually seen Nosferatu, so
I haven't seen it either. No, I've seen parts of the original, but
Mhm.
yeah.
because it's a silent film, right?
Oh yeah, it's old.
Yeah, like
We should do a silent film at some point.
yeah, maybe we'll do Nosferatu next year.
Maybe
I
we
actually
will.
was thinking about it when I was doing my notes for this. Is maybe this might be the first one because we haven't actually done that yet on the podcast, but it's been something that I've been bouncing around, like doing a movie that's in conversation directly with another movie, or it's a remake, or it's a prequel, or whatever.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because like even like A Night to Remember, like the Titanic one, when we did that way back when, maybe it was 2 years ago. But
Titanic? I think
yeah.
that was 2 years ago because I had just started.
yeah,
I
okay.
was still trying to pass my probation.
But yeah, I really want to do A Night to Remember at some point. Effects and filming. So Winona Ryder can sometimes get a little bit of flack for her accent in this movie, but without her, we wouldn't have this adaptation.
Yeah, it's kind of a fun story. She was supposed to be Sofia Coppola's character in Godfather 3
Yeah.
and got ill or something and had to drop out.
And she felt bad and like wanted to make up with Francis Ford Coppola, and she read this script and she was like, hey, you should give this a read and maybe you'll like it. And she didn't realize that Francis Ford Coppola was a massive Dracula fan.
Okay,
And-
well, sometimes you got to shoot your shot, right?
Yeah. And so they ended up he read the script. He loved it because this was a original script that is kind of floating around Hollywood at this time. So he ends up taking it on and, putting his own special touch on it. So we really have Winona Ryder to thank for this adaptation.
Yeah, thanks, Winona.
Yeah. Full credit goes to her for making this happen.
There is something to that, though, when like a project or a relationship falls through or something. Like, don't, you never know what other good things might come from that down the line, right? Mm-hmm. Stay tenacious, people.
The other thing I was going to mention with Winona is actually related to her and Keanu getting married in the movie.
Yeah.
And how they shot it in LA at a Greek Orthodox church. And because they actually they went through, they did a genuine Greek Orthodox marriage and they shot it all and everything. And they realized afterwards that probably is actually a real marriage, that they could actually technically be husband and wife.
That's the big joke, that they've been married this whole time.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so she actually still texts Keanu and calls him husband all the time. So
I'm sure her real life husband just loves that.
I think both her and Keanu have stayed very close friends because I don't know if they dated around this time, but I think there was a brief point in time when they were together.
Was it?
So I think so.
I couldn't say.
Yeah. They've been close for forever, though. So
I did see a funny joke that the reason Keanu Reeves is so bad in this movie is he's trying to throw people off the scent that he's an actual vampire.
Well, he does have to get allowed into Count Dracula's home, right? During the wine scene.
Yeah, that's true.
He has to be welcomed in.
Specifically welcomed in, yeah.
And it's shot it makes note of that too. So
yeah, really,
I could see it.
He has started to age just a little bit, so he's probably not a practicing vampire right now.
I love also all the Gary Oldman stuff online about this movie. I mean, Gary Oldman's always such an interesting person to read about because he's a method actor, so he gets into character and then he stays in character.
He vanishes. Yeah.
The other reason, I already mentioned, he wanted to be able to say I've crossed oceans of time to find you, and that kind of stuck with him. But he also just really wanted to work with Coppola because, at that point...
everybody wants to work with Coppola.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
Maybe not now, but...
Well, even now, you look at the cast of Megalopolis, and there's some really interesting actors in there. Adam Driver is one of the biggest names in Hollywood right now.
Yeah. John Voight.
Well, apparently... John Voight's kind of fallen off, but...
Yeah, no, but he's there. I think Adam Driver said that making Megalopolis was the best experience he ever had on filmmaking.
I mean, I believe that. But Gary Oldman, he said he hired a singing coach to help him lower his voice, so that he could make Dracula sound more sinister.
Interesting.
Which is wild.
just drop your voice, Gary. It's not that hard. It's not that hard.
He always goes the extra mile. The scene that I mentioned that I keep coming back to, the rat scene, he didn't think that he was scary enough in that scene, and the suit was kind of constricting his movement and stuff a little bit. And so Francis Ford Coppola told him he got to whisper something scary into each of the cast members' ears to make their reaction to him seem more authentic.
Yeah.
Nobody said what he said to each person, but apparently each person was individually terrified by what he told them.
I think there's a lot of stories of actors being tormented on this movie.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff about Winona Ryder.
Yeah, there's some sketchy shit. I think there was a scene where I think it was when Winona Ryder was about to drink communion blood or something, and he didn't think she looked guilty enough, so he started calling her a whore and a slut, and he was trying to get other castmates and crew members to join in. And I think Keanu Reeves and Gary Oldman were no. She's an actor, let her act, we don't have to scream at her.
Yeah,
I'm saying this sarcastically. The good old days when you could just torment your cast and crew to get a better performance out of them.
And that's the debate, right? Some directors feel strongly about that, and other directors are I just turn the camera on and let the actors do their thing.
What was it, the Die Hard thing where they told Alan Rickman, we're gonna drop you on 3, and they dropped him on 2 just to get a more genuine reaction out of him.
Right.
He was apparently pretty pissed off about that. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not a director. I can't say.
I mean, that's less mean too. At the end of the day, he's getting dropped no matter what. So
yeah, and they weren't
I'm talking
they weren't 1, 2, 3, you're a slut, and then they dropped him.
Yeah.
It's
I'm not talking Stanley Kubrick punishment here. I'm talking that, or that's what I am talking about. That's a little bit different, but this is kind of interesting, and I still don't know if it really added a whole lot, but it does make for interesting discussion. Is the scene where Lucy gets back in her coffin, they shot the entire thing in reverse.
I did something about that looked off to me. I was like, oh, are we reversing this footage?
Yeah, to make it look eerie. And so, I don't know, I guess you noticed it, and that's cool, but I guess I missed it, and I'm going to have to watch that scene over again to see if I notice it.
My favorite part of that scene is Van Helsing waves the crucifix at her. She climbs back in her coffin, goes to sleep, again, air quotes, but then she kind of comes back alive, like, bleh!
Yeah, it's like an Exorcist moment.
Yeah,
That was neat. I actually really like that scene a lot.
Apparently, Gary Oldman and Winona Ryder really didn't get along on this movie, but have since reconciled.
I read about that, and like it sounded like the vibe that I got was Gary Oldman stayed in character the entire movie, in and outside of the movie while they were filming. Thinking about that, and if you think about this character lusting over this other character, you could understand where Winona would maybe get annoyed with him. And she said, like, oh, at the time, like, I read something about him going through a divorce at the time, and like, there's maybe some comments that maybe infer some things about maybe what was going on. But yeah, it sounds like they've reconciled since, but maybe not the best experience for anybody involved. You briefly mentioned this, how like they had the actors together and like building up some repertoire with each person. I love the fact that each of the three suitors got to like basically go and hang out and like spend a lot of time together to like make them feel like a group of
unit
friends.
yeah
Yeah, like they got to go on adventures, as Coppola called it. Like they went horse riding and hot air ballooning together, and like they just kind of got to go and have fun before the movie started.
Yeah, and what a weird relationship, right? Like maybe I'm just a little petty and closed-minded, but imagine dating a woman and then becoming friends with her two other boyfriends.
Yeah,
And then the three of you just become like a unit.
well, it kind of works in this movie, like at a point, because I kind of believe, again, and maybe that's the Francis Ford Coppola method of like having these three dudes hang out for a while, but I kind of believed like there was a point in time when I actually had forgotten that they were the three suitors together, like especially the Texan and Carrie Elways, those two together. I was like, I forgot that they were both suitors, and I was like, oh, these characters are having a lot of fun with each other right now.
Yeah,
like these seem
hey.
like really good buddies. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I liked that. I thought that was a cool touch, and it worked for me. So
It definitely did, yeah. Those three guys.
I was kind of actually blown away reading by this, like some of the talent that was involved in this. Like in the team of people who were doing like the effects and everything, the production artist was Mentor Hubner, who worked on Rise of the Guardians. You have the guy who directed Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Whoa, he
And-
was on this movie?
Yeah, and the creator of Hellboy was involved in this.
Huh, I could see that actually.
Yeah,
In terms of the visual style things.
yeah,
Wasn't there just a new Hellboy movie too?
there was. I mean, I haven't seen it, but
Yeah.
I'm not a huge Hellboy guy. I know there's
Nah.
some people, like, I'm pretty sure Jess is a big Ron Perlman Hellboy guy or girl, but I don't know. They're fine.
Yeah.
They're not my style.
No.
Otherwise, like, the score of this movie absolutely slaps. Like, I couldn't find much about it, but I was re-listening to it. I was like, yeah, this is sick. Like, this is real good
Tight. Yeah.
gothic horror vibe kind of thing. Oh, I didn't mention this before, but Liam Neeson apparently was originally considered for the role of Van Helsing,
Right.
and he ended up turning it down, I think.
I think what happened is Anthony Hopkins expressed interest, and he was a hot commodity after Silence of the Lambs, so they just
Yeah.
went, sorry, Liam.
I mean, it's a different movie if Liam Neeson's in it. Like, I don't know if Liam Neeson adds the same, like, humorous undertones to some of the line readings that
No.
Anthony Hopkins does.
It probably wouldn't have worked because he would have made it he would have done it very seriously.
I think he would have done it a lot more seriously. Like, Anthony Hopkins, there's just something in the performance that, like, I absolutely loved. So
Yeah. No kidding.
So we already mentioned that it won the Oscar for Best Costume Design, but it also won the Best Sound Editing and Best Makeup as well. It was also nominated for Best Art Direction. Much like we've said throughout this movie, the style of this movie should be commended, and it was at the time as well. So
Yeah. No, absolutely.
personal reviews and the partner factor. So obviously, I mean, I've kind of hinted at this. I loved this movie. I had a blast. I had so much fun the entire time. Yeah, the plot threads are weak, but I didn't really care because I was having such a good time watching it that I was laughing out loud for most of the movie. Like, I didn't take me long to just completely throw out the idea of me being serious about this film or taking this film very seriously. I was just having a good time, having a laugh, like enjoying the weird performances.
Having a lark,
Yeah,
for
like,
sure.
I had a blast. Like, genuinely, this is one of the most fun movie experiences that I've had this year. I really had a good time.
Okay,
with this one.
great. That's awesome. No,
Yeah.
I'm happy for you.
It hit for me. And again, this maybe goes back to like just the fact that I'm a little bit biased with Francis Ford Coppola, and I really enjoy his stuff. And I haven't seen, in all fairness, I haven't seen the stuff that's not considered good of his. But
yeah,
I don't know. Maybe that stuff doesn't work for me as well. But I think I had a good time. Jess had a good time watching this one. She wasn't expecting like that Dracula would be as erotic as it is, whereas I kind of anticipated
you were
that.
into it. Yeah.
Yeah, and like so, and again, like I said, early on in the movie, she kind of got the vibe that this was kind of not meant to be taken too seriously, that there was some sort of like comedic undertones to it, and she kind of, once she was like said that out loud, I think she kind of relaxed and like got into it in that sense as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's interesting how your expectations for a movie can kind of color your experience, right?
Definitely. We've talked about that before for sure on other movies. And like for me, I wasn't expecting this movie to have that, but it kind of disarmed me quick enough that I was like, okay, I'm in now.
Yeah, I'm good. I'll do it.
I guess that's the point, is that it disarmed my expectations so quickly, and it also like the style was doing a lot of work as well. So like I was able to kind of move into the trajectory of what this movie was taking me on.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I had an okay time with this movie. I did not pass the vibe check. So
You usually don't.
no. So, yeah, I mean, I didn't hate it and I didn't think it was bad and I didn't regret watching it. It just wasn't for me,
Yeah.
you know?
Yep.
It's like those first dates you go on where it's like, you're lovely, but this just not for me, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Different strokes for different folks.
different strokers for different
Blokers.
Yeah.
I guess question for you. Is there any vibe movie that you do vibe with?
I mean, I love The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. That's kind of a vibe movie, isn't it? I guess, how would you describe a vibe movie?
A vibe movie is like, it has a very unique style that you wouldn't typically see somewhere else, or maybe you have seen it somewhere else, but it's been...
Okay, maybe by vibe movie, do you mean a movie that's a little bit hyper stylized? And
Yes.
it's like, okay, like I loved Poor Things earlier this year.
Okay, yep.
I loved Poor Things. I loved The Lobster. That's by the same director. So, yeah, I'm sure there's more that I can think of. Like, Coen Brothers are almost a little bit vibe movies, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
They have a very specific sense of humor, and I like them.
Yeah, like Black... Yeah.
So, yeah, no, I can vibe with some movies, just not all of them.
That's fair. I think it's nice to be able to like point to specific vibe movies that you vibe with, because we've done a lot of movies that I vibe with, and I don't know if we've done many movies on the podcast that are vibe movies that you
we
have.
just did Batman Mask of the Phantasm, which I really vibed with.
Right.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's a vibe movie though, you know?
That's a movie.
We need to figure out what the definition of a vibe movie
Yeah,
is.
sound off in the comments if you can help us out with that.
And like what a good example of other vibe movies are, because I think of like Trainspotting when I think of a vibe movie.
I liked Trainspotting a lot, actually.
It's one of my favorite movies of all time.
My favorite part is when I accidentally got 45 minutes into the sequel and then had to double back.
Did you ever finish the sequel?
No, I should though,
it's
because
really
I was
good.
enjoying it.
It's
yeah.
really good. I'm trying to think of other like vibe movies. Drive is a good vibe movie.
I've been meaning to watch Drive. I've never seen it.
I like it a lot. I think anything by Wes Anderson you could consider somewhat of a vibe movie.
I've never seen a Wes Anderson movie either.
I guess for a vibe movie, I would say something where the style is like meticulously thought over, and maybe the style is the focal point, in the sense that like if you're making a creative choice, you choose style over a story or a narrative component.
I guess
to
it's
it.
like the difference between commercial fiction and literary fiction, right? Where with literary fiction, the writing style is often a key feature. Yeah, we'll work on this. We'll get back to you guys.
We will at some point come up with what a vibe movie means to us.
But
And
not today.
not today, but This was our horror episode, despite it suddenly not becoming all that much of a horror.
Despite not being horrific at all.
No, but I had a lot of fun, and I'm glad we did this one because I don't know that I would have gotten to this one anytime soon, and now I think I'll probably rewatch it in the next 2 years, probably.
Well, I accidentally watched this movie back-to-back 2023 and 2024, and I think I'm going to take next year off.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's it. Like, I haven't actually looked at what our next episode is going to be yet, so we have no thoughts on that, no way to direct you to what it's going to be. You'll just have to wait and see. It's going to be a surprise for all of us.
It's going to be. I'm going to sit down in your basement turned studio. We're going to start recording, and I'll be surprised.
It's a historic biographic film is our next up, and so I actually don't know what that's going to be yet.
Couldn't help you there.
So sound off on the comments below if there's one that you're interested in us viewing.
Let's do Blonde, because apparently it sucks. No, that's past our window, and I don't want to do it.
I have zero interest in watching that movie.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's it for Bram Stoker's. Or sorry, that's
it.
For...
You did it.
Did I say Stroker?
I think you did.
Oh no, I was gonna say. And anyway, that's it for Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula.
You did it again.
Damn it, I did that time.
Yeah.
Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yeah. Oh, that poor.
Tell your dad.
That poor man.
Tell your father.
Tell your father. Actually, tell your mom. She might enjoy this movie a little more.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you might have hit the nail on the hammer there. Maybe this is more for
moms.
Yeah.
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 Maybe.
All right, we'll see you next time.
Bye.